The stars burned like a million watchful eyes, cold and indifferent to the carnage unfolding in their midst. Space was never silent during war. The void echoed with the screams of torn metal, the guttural roars of explosions, and the desperate cries of soldiers fighting for survival. The battle between the Xerthian Dominion and the human coalition had raged for hours, a deadly dance of fire and destruction. Seyla, an elite warrior of the Xerthian forces, maneuvered her sleek fighter craft through the chaotic battlefield. Her twin hearts pounded in rhythm with the ship's alarm system's blaring warnings. Shields failing. Hull integrity compromised. Target locked. A human cruiser fired. A blinding explosion rocked her ship as the plasma torpedo struck true. Scylla's vision blurred as her cockpit spun wildly out of control. Flames lit at the edges of her field of view, and the oxygen supply sputtered. She gritted her sharp teeth and fought with the controls, but it was useless. Gravity from the nearby planet pulled her in, an inevitable descent into the unknown. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was the emerald sphere of an uncharted world rushing up to meet her. Pain. It was the first thing Scylla felt when consciousness returned. She lay amidst the smoldering wreckage of her ship, her body trapped within the mangled remains of the cockpit. Her suit's emergency systems flickered erratically, failing to compensate for the damage. The once indomitable warrior now found herself weak, her limbs sluggish, her twin hearts struggling to pump what little oxygen remained in her failing support systems. She tried to move but gasped in agony. A sharp piece of metal had punctured through her side, and her armor's regenerative properties were too depleted to mend the wound. Scylla growled in frustration, forcing herself to focus. She had to survive. She had to find a way to. Footsteps. A presence approached through the thick, alien foliage surrounding the crash site. Human? Enemy? Scylla's instincts screamed at her to reach for her weapon, but her strength failed her. Her vision swam, and the world around her tilted. Then, a voice. Deep, cautious, and undeniably human. Well, shit. You're not from around here, are you? Ethan Carter had seen many strange things in his years of self-imposed exile, but this was a first. A crashed Xerthian ship, and inside, a wounded warrior from the very species that had waged war against his people. He should have turned away, let nature take its course. But something about the way she lay there, fighting even in her weakened state, made him pause. With a sigh, he stepped forward. Guess I have work to do. Ethan knelt beside the wreckage, his sharp eyes scanning the unconscious form of the alien warrior. The sight before him was nothing short of surreal. A Xerthian, a species known for their brutal efficiency in combat, lying helpless and wounded. Her armor, once a masterpiece of alien engineering, was now cracked and scorched, exposing sections of her violet-hued skin beneath. Her breathing was shallow, her twin hearts beating at an erratic pace. He hesitated. This was the enemy. The Xerthians had waged war against humanity for decades, and Ethan had lost people he cared about because of them. His first instinct should have been to walk away, to let fate decide her outcome. But as he stood there, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest, something in him refused to abandon her. Perhaps it was the part of him that still believed in mercy. Or maybe, after years of solitude, he simply couldn't ignore another living being in distress. Damn it, he muttered under his breath, running a hand through his unkempt hair. Why do I always get myself into these messes? With a deep breath, he reached out and carefully lifted her from the debris, mindful of the jagged metal shards protruding from her side. She was heavier than she looked, her lean frame packed with dense alien muscle. Ethan gritted his teeth as he carried her toward his shelter, navigating through the dense undergrowth that surrounded his hidden refuge. Scylla awoke to an unfamiliar ceiling. Her instincts kicked in immediately, and she tried to sit up, only to be met with a searing pain radiating from her side. A sharp intake of breath escaped her lips as she clenched her teeth against the agony. It was then that she noticed the room crude, built from salvaged metal and stone, filled with various tools and machinery. And then she saw him. A human. Her pulse spiked as adrenaline surged through her veins. Without thinking, she attempted to lunge forward, reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. But her body betrayed her, her limbs were sluggish, her strength drained. She collapsed back onto the makeshift cot with a frustrated growl, glaring at the man standing a few feet away. "Easy there," Ethan said, raising his hands in a show of non-aggression. "You're in no shape to fight." Scylla's eyes burned with suspicion. "Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse, and she hated the weakness it revealed. "My home," Ethan replied simply. "You crashed. I pulled you out before your ship went up in flames." She stared at him, processing his words. "Why?" Ethan shrugged. "Seemed like the right thing to do." "The right thing?" Scylla scoffed, shifting slightly. "We are enemies, human. You should have let me die." "Maybe," Ethan admitted. "But I didn't." Their gazes locked, a silent battle waging between them. Scylla's training told her not to trust him. Humans were deceitful, dangerous. Yet, here she was, alive because of one. The irony was bitter on her tongue. She turned her head away. "I do not need your help." Ethan exhaled sharply, running a hand over his stub-bled jaw. "Yeah? Because from where I'm standing, you're in no position to refuse it." Scylla growled, frustrated by her helplessness. She despised the vulnerability, the knowledge that her fate now rested in human hands. But what choice did she have? Over the next few hours, Ethan worked on repairing her armor. It was a challenge. Xerthian technology was vastly different from anything he had encountered before, but he was nothing if not resourceful. He studied the intricate circuitry, carefully soldering broken connections and patching up damaged plating. Scylla watched him from her cot, eyes narrowed. "You understand nothing of Xerthian engineering." "I understand enough," Ethan retorted without looking up. "Besides, it's not like you're in any condition to fix it yourself." She bristled at his words but said nothing. Instead, she observed him closely. He worked with a quiet focus, hands steady and precise. He wasn't just some scavenger, he had skill, knowledge. A technician? An engineer? She couldn't be sure. "I don't trust you," she muttered after a long silence. Ethan let out a dry chuckle. "Yeah, I figured." She studied his face, searching for deception. Humans were known for their lies, their tricks. But so far, he had done nothing but help her. It made no sense. War had taught her that kindness was a luxury, one that neither side could afford. And yet, this human seemed intent on proving her wrong. Ethan finally looked up, meeting her gaze. "You don't have to trust me. But if you want to survive, you might want to consider working with me instead of against me." Scylla held his stare for a moment before exhaling sharply. "We shall see, human." A smirk tugged at the corner of Ethan's lips. "Yeah. We shall." Ethan sat near the entrance of his shelter, watching the dim glow of the distant stars. The night was eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustle of the wind through the alien foliage. Inside, Scylla remained on the cot, her wounds healing at an accelerated rate thanks to her species' natural resilience. She was regaining her strength, which meant the uneasy truce between them was bound to be tested soon. He turned to glance at her, noting the way her gaze flitted across his workshop. She was studying his makeshift home, taking in the shelves stacked with salvage tech, the crude but functional generator, the neatly arranged tools. He wondered what she thought of it. Did she see him as a mere scavenger, a man clinging to a past life? Or did she suspect there was more to his story? "I was an engineer once," Ethan said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Back in the war?" Scylla's gaze snapped to him. "A military engineer?" He nodded, a distant look in his eyes. "Yeah. I designed weapons, armor, ships, things meant to keep soldiers alive. Or to end fights quickly." His fingers tightened around a small wrench he had been absently holding. "But then something happened. Something that made me question what I was doing." Scylla remained silent, waiting. Despite herself, she was curious. Ethan exhaled slowly. "A mission went wrong. I was stationed on a research vessel developing next-gen defense systems. We got ambushed. Not by your kind, by our own. A faction that wanted the tech for themselves. They didn't care who they had to kill to get it." He paused, jaw tightening. "I survived. Barely. But a lot of good people didn't. After that, I walked away. I couldn't be part of it anymore." Scylla studied him, her expression unreadable. "And you think hiding on this planet will erase what you've done?" Ethan met her gaze, his eyes steady. "No. But at least here, I don't have to contribute to more destruction." A long silence stretched between them. Scylla found herself unsettled. She had always seen humans as warmongers, relentless in their expansion and destruction. Yet here was one who had turned his back on war. It was unexpected. Before she could formulate a response, a distant rumble echoed through the valley. Ethan tensed, immediately grabbing a pair of binoculars and moving toward a small lookout window. His gut twisted at the sight before him, an incoming dropship, its metallic hull glinting under the faint light of the planet's twin moons. "Trouble?" Scylla asked, her tone cautious. Ethan's jaw clenched. "Looks like it." He turned to her. "That's a mercenary ship. And I doubt they're here for a friendly visit." Scylla's blood ran cold. "They're after me?" Ethan studied her. "Then we have two options. You run, and hope they don't track you, or we stand our ground." Scylla's fingers twitched. She knew what running meant. Eventually, she would be captured, dragged back as a traitor or worse. But trusting a human to fight by her side? It went against everything she had been taught. Yet, in this moment, as she looked at the man who had saved her life despite having every reason not to, she realized she had little choice. She met Ethan's gaze. "Then we stand." A small, grim smile formed on his lips. "Good. Let's get to work." The stillness of the night was shattered by the distant hum of approaching ships. Ethan's fingers tightened around the rifle he had retrieved from his storage, his keen eyes scanning the dark horizon. He had been expecting trouble ever since Scylla's arrival, but not this soon. Scylla stood beside him, her posture tense. Despite her injuries, she had forced herself to her feet, determination burning in her eyes. "They've found me," she said, voice laced with frustration. "They will not stop until I am either dead or captured." Ethan's jaw clenched. "Then we better make sure that doesn't happen." The mercenary ship landed roughly a mile away from Ethan's shelter, sending a cloud of dust and debris into the air. The eerie glow of its searchlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the twisted terrain. Moments later, armored figures disembarked, weapons drawn, and moving in tight formation. Ethan cursed under his breath. "They are professionals. This won't be easy. Scylla nodded. I am in no condition to fight them alone. But if you have a plan, I will follow. Ethan glanced at her, momentarily surprised by the shift in her tone. It wasn't trust at least, not yet, but it was something close. A silent agreement. We can take them head on, he muttered, kneeling to retrieve a small device from his stash. But we can control the battlefield. This terrain works in our favor. There's a ravine nearby with unstable ground. If we can lure them there. Scylla caught on quickly. We collapse the ground beneath them. A tactical ambush. Ethan smirked. Exactly. Let's get moving. The first shots rang out moments later. The mercenaries moved methodically, sweeping the area with infrared scanners. But Ethan and Scylla stayed one step ahead, using their knowledge of the terrain to remain unseen. Ethan took position behind a rocky outcrop, his rifle trained on the lead soldier. He exhaled slowly before squeezing the trigger. A precise shot to the shoulder sent the mercenaries sprawling, disrupting their formation. The response was immediate. Gunfire erupted, streaks of plasma lighting up the darkness. Scylla moved like a shadow, her weakened state doing little to dull her reflexes. With a swift motion, she lunged at an unsuspecting mercenary, her blade finding its mark between the armor plates. They fought as one, an unspoken rhythm forming between them. Ethan covered her from a distance, picking off enemies with deadly precision, while Scylla closed the gap, using her speed and agility to outmaneuver their foes. Then came the moment they had been waiting for. Ethan triggered the explosives he had planted earlier. The ground trembled before giving way, sending the remaining mercenaries tumbling into the ravine below. Silence followed. Scylla stood beside him, breathing heavily. She looked at Ethan, something unreadable in her gaze. You are more than just a mechanic. Ethan chuckled, reloading his rifle. And you're more than just a soldier. For the first time, Scylla did not argue. Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow as he surveyed his work. The armor, once a shattered husk of its former self, now stood restored, its gleaming surface reflecting the dim glow of his workshop's lighting. He ran his fingers over the reinforced plating, ensuring every circuit, every joint, was functional. It had taken days of effort, using scavenged parts and a mix of human and Xerthian technology, but he had done it. Behind him, Scylla watched in silence. She had observed his meticulous process, the care he had taken in understanding her technology, adapting it rather than forcing human methods onto it. It was unexpected. Humans were known for their crude engineering, their improvised solutions, yet Ethan had treated her armor as if it were sacred. As if it mattered. Ethan turned, meeting her gaze. It's done, he said, gesturing toward the armor. You should be able to move properly now. I even managed to reinforce some weak points. It's not perfect, but it should hold up in a fight. Scylla hesitated before stepping forward, running her own hands over the repaired armor. She could feel the differences, the subtle weight redistribution, the reinforced servo joints that would enhance her movements. It was better than before. You did well, she admitted, her voice softer than usual. I did not think a human could achieve this. Ethan smirked. You're not the first to underestimate me. Scylla regarded him thoughtfully. Perhaps I was wrong about your kind. Ethan leaned against the workbench, folding his arms. Yeah? What changed? She was silent for a moment before she spoke. I have spent my life believing humans to be weak, inefficient, emotional creatures. But you, she exhaled. You do not fit that mold. You fight with intelligence, not just brute force. You repair instead of destroy. And you saved me when you had every reason not to. Ethan's expression softened. War paints people in broad strokes. It makes it easy to dehumanize or de-Xerthianize, I guess. But when you strip it all away, we're just people trying to survive. Scylla studied him, her twin hearts beating in an unfamiliar rhythm. She had been raised in a society that saw war as an inevitability, that viewed humans as little more than a nuisance to be eradicated. And yet, here she was, standing in the shelter of a human who had shown her nothing but kindness, despite everything. Ethan broke the silence. Do you ever think about peace? Scylla blinked. Peace? Yeah, he said, his gaze distant. A world where we're not killing each other. Where we don't have to live in the shadows, waiting for the next battle. She hesitated. It was a naive thought, or at least, she had always believed it to be. But now, after everything, I do not know if such a world is possible, she admitted. But for the first time, I wonder. Ethan nodded, a ghost of a smile on his lips. That's a start. Scylla reached for her armor. Then let us see what comes next. The campfire crackled softly in the darkness, casting flickering shadows across the rocky terrain. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of scorched metal and damp earth. Ethan sat across from Scylla, his hands busy cleaning the rifle that had saved both of their lives hours earlier. The adrenaline of battle had faded, replaced by a quiet, uneasy peace. Scylla had been silent for a long time, her gaze fixed on a distant horizon. Ethan noticed the way her fingers tensed around the edge of her repaired gauntlet, a sign of inner turmoil. He set his rifle down and studied her expression. You look like you have something on your mind, he said finally. She exhaled slowly, as if weighing her words carefully. There is something I have not told you, Ethan. Something that could change everything. Ethan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Go on. Scylla hesitated, then turned to face him directly. I am not just another Xerthian soldier. I am the daughter of High General Vorden, one of the most powerful figures in our military. Ethan's breath hitched slightly, but he quickly masked his reaction. That explains why they are so determined to get you back. She nodded. If I am captured, I will be forced to return. If I refuse, I will be declared a traitor. Either way, I will never know peace again. Silence stretched between them. Ethan processed her words carefully. He had suspected she was more than just an ordinary soldier, but this revelation added a new layer of complexity to their already precarious situation. Why are you telling me this now? He asked. Scylla's eyes darkened. Because after everything I have seen here, after the kindness you have shown me, I am beginning to question everything I was raised to believe. I was taught that humans were weak, inferior, unworthy of mercy. But you are not weak. And you have shown me a kind of strength I never understood before. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, trying to digest the weight of her confession. So what now? Do you want to go back? Or do you want to run? She looked at him with an intensity that made his pulse quicken. If I run, they will hunt me until my last breath. If I return, I will be forced to fight against you. There is no easy path. Ethan sighed, leaning back against the rock behind him. Then we have a choice to make. Either we find a way to hide you, or we figure out how to stop them from coming after you altogether. Scylla tilted her head. You would help me? Even knowing what I am. He met her gaze without hesitation. You saved my life out there. And I don't leave people behind. A flicker of something passed through her eyes, something that looked almost like gratitude, or maybe even hope. She nodded slowly. Then we fight together. Until the end. Ethan smirked. Well, let's hope the end isn't anytime soon. The fire crackled between them, casting long shadows as the night stretched on. They both knew that this was only the beginning of a much bigger battle, one that would determine both of their fates. The silence of the barren landscape was shattered by the low hum of incoming warships. The sky darkened as the shadows of massive Xerthian vessels loomed overhead. Ethan and Seyla stood at the edge of the rocky outcrop, their eyes locked onto the growing fleet above them. "They've found me," Seyla muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan clenched his fists. "Not just you. They are coming for both of us." The lead ship, an ominous dreadnought emblazoned with the insignia of the Xerthian High Command, descended onto the cracked ground below. From its open bay, an army of elite soldiers emerged, their polished armor gleaming under the artificial lights of their transport. At their center stood a towering figure, General Xylan, Scylla's father. His presence was suffocating. Clad in a regal battlesuit, his crimson cape billowed behind him as he strode forward with the confidence of a warlord. His piercing gaze locked onto Seyla, unreadable yet filled with unmistakable authority. "Daughter," Xylan spoke, his deep voice carrying across the battlefield. "You have strayed far enough. It is time to return home." Scylla's muscles tensed. This was the moment she had feared. Her father, the most feared commander in the Xerthian fleet, had come not only to retrieve her but to eliminate any who stood in his way. Ethan stepped forward, placing himself slightly between Seyla and the approaching force. "She's not going anywhere unless she chooses to." A ripple of murmurs spread among the Xerthian soldiers. A mere human, standing in defiance of their supreme commander? Xylan tilted his head, intrigued rather than angered. "And who are you to interfere in matters beyond your comprehension?" Xylan's voice remained cold, yet there was an underlying amusement in his tone. "You are nothing but an insect beneath our boots. Stand aside before you are crushed." Scylla's breath hitched. The weight of expectation bore down on her. She knew how this confrontation would end if she did not act. Her father would destroy Ethan without hesitation. The soldiers would drag her back, and everything she had fought to understand about herself, about the truth beyond war, would be lost. She inhaled deeply, gripping the hilt of her plasma blade. "No, I will not return." A brief flicker of something, surprise? Disappointment, crossed Xylan's face before it was buried beneath his cold exterior. "You defy your bloodline? You would abandon your people for a lesser species?" Scylla straightened her back. "I would abandon blind obedience. I would abandon a war that no longer makes sense to me." The surrounding soldiers shifted, uncertain. This was not mere desertion, this was rebellion. And rebellion was met with only one punishment. Xylan let out a slow exhale, as if mourning a daughter who had died long ago. "Then you leave me no choice." With a flick of his wrist, he signaled his troops. They surged forward. Ethan barely had time to react before the first shots rang out. He grabbed Scylla's arm, yanking her into cover behind a crumbling boulder as plasma fire scorched the ground where they had stood moments before. The Xerthians moved with terrifying precision, their formation tightening around them like a noose. "We can't win this head-on," Ethan shouted over the chaos. "We need to get out of here." Scylla's mind raced. Running would only delay the inevitable. If they wanted a chance at survival, they needed a real plan. But first, she had to make a choice, a final, irreversible choice. Her eyes met Ethan's, and in that moment, she knew. She would fight. Not for Xerthia. Not for her father. But for herself and for the only person who had ever given her the freedom to choose. "Then let's make them regret coming here," she said, gripping her weapon tighter. Ethan grinned despite the overwhelming odds. Now that's the spirit. The battle had begun. The battle raged around them, plasma bolts illuminating the night sky in flashes of blue and red. The air was thick with smoke, the scent of burning metal and scorched earth mingling into a suffocating haze. Ethan and Seyla moved as one, dodging between the craggy outcroppings that offered fleeting cover against the relentless onslaught of Xerthian forces. Seyla knew they could not hold out forever. Her father's forces were overwhelming in number, and General Xylan himself was an opponent unlike any other. Her mind raced through the countless battle strategies drilled into her since childhood, but this was different. She wasn't fighting for conquest or honor. She was fighting for Ethan. And for herself. She turned to him, her voice urgent. "We need to split up. I can buy you time." Ethan shook his head. "Not a chance. We do this together. If we both stay, we die together." She grasped his arm. "Trust me." For a moment, he hesitated, the weight of her words heavy between them. Then, reluctantly, he nodded. "Be careful." Scylla's plan was reckless. It was desperate. But it was the only chance they had. She sprinted forward, drawing the attention of her father's elite guard. Plasma fire followed her every step as she weaved through the battlefield, her agility keeping her just ahead of death. Then, she saw him, General Xylan, standing unshaken amidst the chaos, his piercing gaze fixed upon her. "Daughter," he intoned, his voice carrying effortlessly over the roar of battle. "You cannot outrun destiny." Scylla drew her plasma blade, its energy humming to life in her grip. "I make my own destiny." Xylan sighed, as if mourning a disappointment rather than preparing for battle. "So be it." Their clash was instantaneous and brutal. Xylan moved with the precision of a master tactician, his every strike deliberate, his every block effortless. Scylla fought with fury, her strikes fueled by a lifetime of conflict and newfound conviction. Sparks flew as their blades met, the force of each blow sending shockwaves through the battlefield. Ethan, meanwhile, had maneuvered through the chaos, evading capture as he closed in on the enemy's command ship. He knew their only hope lay in crippling the fleet's coordination, and that meant severing its command structure. He scaled the side of a wrecked transport, using its charred remains as cover to infiltrate the ship's perimeter. Inside, alarms blared. Xerthian officers scrambled to respond to the unexpected breach, but Ethan was faster. With a well-placed explosive charge, he disabled the ship's primary communication relay. The battlefield descended into momentary disarray as the enemy's command structure faltered. But Ethan had no time to celebrate. A massive figure loomed before him, one of Xylan's enforcers, a towering warrior clad in heavy armor. The fight was brutal. Ethan ducked beneath the sweeping strike, feeling the air crackle with the force of the attack. He retaliated, using every ounce of his combat training, but the enforcer was relentless. A powerful blow sent Ethan crashing into a metal console, pain lancing through his ribs. Then, just as the enforcer raised his weapon for the final strike, a plasma bolt tore through his chest. He staggered, then collapsed. Scylla stood at the entrance, her weapon still raised, her breathing ragged. "You really know how to cut things close," Ethan groaned, pushing himself to his feet. Scylla offered him a half-smile. "I couldn't let you have all the fun." But there was no time to revel in their victory. Xylan's voice echoed through the ship's COMM system. "Daughter, you cannot run forever." Scylla's expression hardened. "Then I won't run. I end this now." She turned to Ethan. "Go. Get to the escape vessel." "Scylla, This is my fight. But I promise, I'll find you. For a moment, he looked like he would argue, but then he saw the resolve in her eyes. With a nod, he turned and disappeared into the shadows, making his way to the ship's hangar. Scylla took a deep breath, steeling herself. She had chosen her path. And now, she would face her father one last time. Her fate, her future awaited. The vast expanse of space stretched endlessly before them, an infinite sea of stars and darkness. The stolen Xerthian stealth cruiser hummed softly, gliding through the void as Ethan and Scylla sat in the cockpit, their faces illuminated by the glow of the control panels. Their escape had been nothing short of miraculous, but they both knew that survival was only the beginning of their new reality. Ethan gripped the controls tightly, his knuckles white from the tension that had yet to fade. "We're clear of the system, but it's only a matter of time before they come looking for us." That ship wasn't exactly inconspicuous. Scylla sat beside him, her posture rigid, her mind racing with possibilities. "They won't just look for us, Ethan. We are now the most wanted fugitives in the galaxy. Both humans and Xerthians will hunt us down. There's nowhere we can go where we won't be pursued." Ethan exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. "There's always somewhere. We just have to find it." Scylla turned her gaze toward the vast cosmos beyond the viewport. The truth was both exhilarating and terrifying. For the first time in her life, she was untethered from duty, from the expectations of her people. The weight of her lineage, her training, and her past choices pressed down on her, but at the same time, she felt something new: freedom. Yet, with that freedom came uncertainty. "Where do we even go?" she murmured. "We can't hide forever." Ethan considered for a moment before pulling up the ship's navigational interface. "There are places out there, fringe colonies, abandoned outposts, lawless sectors. We don't need to hide forever. We just need to disappear long enough to figure out our next move." Scylla looked at him, studying the lines of worry and determination etched onto his face. He had given up everything to help her. His home, his safety, his people. Now, they were bound together by more than just survival. As silent understanding passed between them, whatever happened next, they would face it together. "You make it sound easy," she said, a faint smile touching her lips. Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "Not easy. Just possible." The ship's sensors beeped, pulling their attention back to the present. A red indicator flashed on the display. Xerthian and human patrols were already combing the sector for them. "Damn it," Ethan muttered. "They are faster than I thought. We need a plan, fast." Scylla's mind raced. "We can't outrun them forever. But we can outthink them. If we make our disappearance look like an accident, they might stop searching." Ethan's eyebrows lifted. "You have something in mind?" She nodded. "There's an asteroid belt near the edge of this system. If we overload the ship's reactor and eject before it explodes, it'll look like we didn't survive. We use the debris as cover and drift until we can find another way off-world." Ethan exhaled sharply. "That's risky as hell. If we miscalculate, we'll be dead in space." Scylla met his gaze. "Do you have a better idea?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "All right. Let's do it." Working quickly, they set the plan into motion. Ethan programmed the reactor to overheat while Scylla rerouted the ship's escape pod launch protocols to be undetectable. As the countdown began, they climbed into the escape pod, strapping in just as alarms blared throughout the cruiser. 3, 2, 1. The ship exploded behind them, sending shockwaves through space. Their escape pod tumbled through the debris field, battered by the force of the blast. Scylla gritted her teeth, gripping the harness tightly as they spun uncontrollably. Then, silence. The pod stabilized, drifting among the remnants of the destroyed ship. Through the viewport, they saw the burning wreckage floating around them, a silent graveyard in the darkness. It worked, Ethan whispered. At least for now. Scylla exhaled, tension draining from her shoulders. Now we wait. Hours passed. Then days. The pod's supplies were limited, but they rationed carefully. Drifting through the void, they found themselves talking about their pasts, their fears, their uncertain future. Scylla spoke of her childhood under her father's strict rule, of the battles she had fought, of the doubts that had slowly crept into her heart. Ethan shared stories of his time as a soldier, of the losses he had endured, of the day he chose to walk away from war. Despite everything, there was comfort in knowing they weren't alone. Eventually, their luck changed. A rogue trader vessel passed through the debris field, scavenging for salvage. Ethan and Scylla powered up the emergency beacon, and within minutes, they were aboard the ship. The captain, a grizzled man with cybernetic implants, eyed them suspiciously. "You two look like trouble. But trouble pays well if you know how to use it." Scylla exchanged a glance with Ethan. Their journey was far from over, but for the first time, she felt something she had never truly known before: hope. For the first time in her life, she was free to choose her own destiny. And she would fight to keep it. The cargo bay of the rogue trader's ship smelled of rusted metal and stale air, a stark contrast to the sterile environment Scylla had grown up in. It was far from comfortable, but it was safe for now. She and Ethan sat on a stack of supply crates, catching their breath after their narrow escape. The trader's crew was wary of them, but at least they weren't handing them over to the highest bidder yet. Ethan wiped a hand across his face, exhaustion evident in his posture. "All right. We made it this far. What's next?" Scylla gazed at the metal-plated floor beneath her boots, her mind a whirlwind of uncertainty. "We can't stay here. This crew will sell us out the moment they get a good offer." Ethan nodded. "Agreed. But we need a destination. Somewhere we can regroup and figure out our next move." The ship jolted slightly as it entered hyperspace. The trader captain, a rugged man named Corin, entered the bay, eyeing them with an unreadable expression. His cybernetic eye whirred softly as it adjusted focus. "You two are lucky I picked you up. But luck runs thin in this part of the galaxy." Scylla tensed. "What do you want?" Corin smirked, leaning against the bulkhead. "Relax. I don't turn in fugitives unless there's profit involved. And right now, you're more valuable alive. I've got a job, an infiltration mission on a remote research outpost. If you help, I'll drop you off wherever you want. No questions asked." Ethan exchanged a glance with Scylla. They had no other immediate options. "What kind of outpost?" Corin's smirk widened. "A joint human Xerthian facility. Black market tech. It's heavily guarded, but for someone like her," he motioned to Scylla, "getting in should be easy." Scylla folded her arms. "And what exactly are we retrieving?" Corin shrugged. "Some prototype energy core. The details don't matter to me. I just deliver the goods." Ethan sighed, rubbing his temples. "And if we say no?" Corin's expression darkened. "Then you're dead weight. And dead weight doesn't stay on my ship for free." Silence stretched between them. Scylla weighed their options. The mission sounded dangerous, but it also provided them with a much-needed opportunity. They needed resources, a plan, and most importantly, time. Finally, she nodded. "We're in." The infiltration mission wasn't easy. The outpost was nestled on a barren moon, hidden beneath layers of automated defenses. Scylla led the way, using her knowledge of Xerthian security protocols to bypass most of the obstacles. Ethan covered her, his sharp instincts keeping them one step ahead of the patrols. Inside, they found more than just an energy core. Data files hinted at a secret project, one that involved genetic experimentation on both humans and Xerthians. Scylla's stomach churned as she read the reports. Her people had always viewed humans as inferior, yet here was evidence that some saw value in merging their strengths. Ethan clenched his fists. This isn't just a research facility. It's a lab for creating weapons out of people. Scylla met his gaze. We have to destroy this place. Ethan nodded. Agreed. But first, we take the data. This could be leverage. As they set the explosives, alarms blared. The facility's security forces descended upon them. Gunfire erupted, and they fought their way back to the extraction point, narrowly escaping as fire consumed the research center behind them. Back aboard Corin's ship, the traitor chuckled, pocketing the stolen energy core. Didn't think you'd go the extra mile and blow the place up. Bold move. Ethan handed him a data chip. Here. Partial schematics of the core. Consider it a bonus. Corin whistled. I like the way you two operate. If you ever need work, you know where to find me. Scylla exhaled, tension leaving her shoulders. Just drop us somewhere quiet. Corin smirked. Suit yourself. As they watched the traitor's ship disappear into hyperspace, Scylla and Ethan stood on the surface of a new world, one untouched by war. The sky was painted in shades of violet and gold, alien yet beautiful. Ethan turned to her. So, what now? Scylla looked at the horizon, a small smile forming. We find our own path. No sides, no factions. Just us. Their journey was only beginning, and the universe was vast with possibilities. But for the first time, they weren't running. They were free.